Hello everyone and welcome back to more of the Fruit of Grisaia. In the last episode, Kazuki and Amane got a little sensual with a leech bite. It's not as good as it sounds. And Mr. Ochi has decided to take a very perilous trek into the woods to try to get help because it's going on 11 days. Almost 2 weeks now. We've been stuck here and no signs of help, Something's got to budge, We got to go out and try to find help. So, let's continue on, shall we? And make sure to like the video if you like the video, and subscribe if you want to see more. It was still raining. It never stopped raining. There's nothing to do but sit around shivering and wait for the weather to clear. Doing nothing all day took a surprisingly heavy toll in its own right. After 10 minutes or so of aimless idleness, you'd be seized by an anxious, impatient need to go do something, anything. But it was impossible to step outside even briefly without being drenched in the downpour. The cold rain would drain your energy with terrifying swiftness, and once you got wet, you stayed that way. We knew it was dangerous to stay in soaked clothes, but we just didn't have the means to get them dry. The constant seeping rainwater began to corrode the thin material that made up the bottom of our tent. Lying down, even with the buffer of the sleeping mat, would leave our whole bodies sopping wet. We had no choice but to sit and wait. In the afternoon, the rain slowed to a heavy drizzle. I had just managed to get a cooking fire going when an eerie sound began to echo across the camp. Someone singing loudly. It was unmistakably Ibuki's voice. Now, in the last episode, we kind of figured out that Ibuki was kind of losing her mind a little bit. Kaneda laughed harshly at an ugly, contorted excuse for a smile on her face. In an attempt to end the mournful, grimace-inducing dirge, Kaneda-senpai hurled a rock in Ibuki's direction. The stone fell a few feet short, and Ibuki turned in our direction to examine it. Her face was ghastly white, her skin dull. It looked as though she had aged 20 years in the last few days. Picking up the muddy stone, Ibuki pressed it to her nose and sniffed curiously. Apparently deciding it wasn't food, she tossed it casually aside and continued her song. When the world grows warped around you, those who can't bend simply break. But watching Ibuki caterwauling idly up at the rain-cloud-filled sky as if to summon the sun, I wondered if derangement might sometimes be a blessing rather than a curse.
なんなんだろうね、あれ。たまにああやっておかしくなるけど、しばらくすると普通に会話できるし、いつものブッキーに戻ってるんだよね。
需要不足らしいですよ。
いつかは私らもあんな風になるのかね。
金田先輩、ここへ来る前ダイエットとかしてました？
あにゃ？
じゃあ大丈夫じゃないですか？
From what Kazuki's told me, Ibuki had been repeatedly subjecting herself to severe, gimmicky diets over the last few months, leaving her with chronic vitamin deficiencies. Since arriving here, that pre-existing condition had apparently worsened the effects of malnutrition on her body, giving rise to impaired brain function.
参っちゃうよね。うちの子守ももうだいぶやばい感じだよ。
Komori was still shut up in their tent, nursing her dog through a high fever. Apparently she was feeding every scrap of her rations to the animal.
あいつの家和菓子屋じゃん。親は二人とも仕事で忙しくてめったに構ってもらえなかったみたいでさ。兄弟もいないあいつには犬が兄弟なんだよね。まあ、わかるけどさ。
Even as Kaneda spoke those carefully neutral words, her mouth was twisted with undisguised loathing. Her true feelings were written on her face. She unambiguously hated that feverish, immobile little dog. It was of no use to her, and so she wanted it to disappear. It was as simple as that.
みんなどんどん弱ってく。このまま私らみんな死ぬんだ。
I understood that the tone of her voice, that this wasn't more of the usual gallows humor. I understood with such painful clarity that I had wished she said nothing at all. Glancing up at the sky as the rain began to intensify yet again, I slowly picked myself up off my seat of rock. I can't take this. Couldn't we at least catch a break on this rain? It was adding insult to injury. Knowing full well that was ridiculous, I did my best whiny preschool impression, asked Kazuki to make the rain stop.
だから私は神様じゃないのよ。似たようなもんでしょ。
Everyone called Kazuki a witch, well, except for the ones who called her a monster. In that case, a little rain magic shouldn't be too much to ask for, right? I mean, I knew it was idiotic, but asking is free. In response to my challenge, Kazuki closed both eyes and exhaled heavily through her nose, as if to say, "Oh, very well then," and lifting both her arms to the sky, she spoke to the heavens. To wit, "O rain, I command you to be on," an exceptionally half-hearted command that dissolved into an open-mouthed yawn at the end. I appreciated that she was considerate enough to play along with my nonsense, but if she was going to bother, couldn't she at least pretended she was taking it seriously? But, well, as it turned out, an hour or so after that, maybe, the rain really did come to a sudden stop. You had to laugh. Ha ha! Kazuki craned her neck back, idly gazing up as the clouds flowed peacefully by.
何でも試してみるものね。
And spoke characteristically impudent words in her characteristically sleepy voice. Staring at her face from the side, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and the wish theory was seeming increasingly plausible. Not that on reflection I really cared if she was some sort of black magician. It'd be nice to have one on her side right about now. If I asked her to spirit everyone to safety for her next trick, I wonder what happened. Asking's free, after all. I looked over at Kazuki, debating whether to throw this new challenge at her, but before I could decide, she stared up into my eyes and spoke.
全員は無理。そう言ったはずよ。だから、私が質問する前に答えを先に言うのはマナー違反だよ。あなたは考えていることがすぐに顔に出るから分かりやすいのよね。
It can be, everyone. Her tone of voice was surprisingly breezy, but somehow also exceptionally firm. As if the outcome was set in stone, as if she was merely repeating an established fact. Kazuki's internal calculations must have established something very close to a 100% possibility that more of us would die in this place. I repeatedly asked her about the details of her predictions, receiving only variations of the frustrating non-answer. If I told you the future I predicted would change. When I finally told her that changing this future sounded like a pretty good idea to me, she coolly replied, even if it would mean none of us survive at all. And I found myself at an utter loss for words. Well, maybe not utter. There was still one old reliable that came to mind.
De?
Don't look at me like that. I'm perfectly aware I'm an idiot. You don't have to rub it in. Even now, Kazuki said that the possibility of everyone surviving wasn't quite zero. By believing in those words, I could hold on to hope. If I had hope, I could find the strength to go on. Yeah, that's right. I have to be stronger than this. But it was hard. It was very hard. A full 2 days had passed since Mr. Oshi left the camp, and as always, there were no signs of rescuers active nearby. Naturally, our teacher hadn't returned either. Is Mr. Oshi lying dead in a ditch somewhere? Maybe he's gotten to some safe place and just abandoned us here. Ugh, I don't want to think about that one. What do we do if he never comes back? Amid a flurry of aimless speculation, we passed the days waiting for help to arrive. They didn't come today, but they'll definitely come tomorrow. They didn't come today either, but they'll definitely come tomorrow. Mr. Oshi said he'd get help no matter what when he left here. Not even half the group really believed it. But even so, somewhere deep down, every one of us was clinging to that glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he'd save us all. That maybe grew feebler by the day, eroded by cruel reality. Even as we came to understand that waiting would only bring us a slow death, we clung to that shred of hope, piling speculation upon speculation. We built excuses out of sand. We convinced ourselves it was too early to decide. We stayed where we were, and we waited for nothing. Trapped in oblivious lethargy, we lived for nothing but to avoid death. When our stomachs growled, we chewed on blades of grass and insects. When our throats were parched, we gulped from the first puddle of dirty water we saw. Naturally, it wasn't long before our stomachs turned violently against us. Somebody said chewing bamboo charcoal might be effective against diarrhea. Within hours, everyone's mouth was stained black. We searched and searched for anything edible. As long as it was organic and digestible, we ate it. Anything and everything. The rest of our time was spent lying in our sleeping bags, stroking our cramping, weak stomachs as we pretended to sleep. If we were lucky enough to fall unconscious, there was a brief respite from the pain. Things are not looking good. The 12th day in the valley. Lately, I was waking every morning from dreams of food. Walking in the forest, I come across a trailer cart with broken wheels. When I draw close and look over the edge, there's a huge cardboard box full of canned food just sitting inside. Not just full, bursting at the seams. There are dozens of cans in that box. Beef boiled with soy sauce and ginger, mackerel cooked in miso, even canned peaches and pineapples. Untucking my shirt to make a pouch, I cautiously load it full of cans, making sure to stay alert and keep an eye out of my surroundings. If I bring all of this back, everyone will be able to eat until our stomachs are bulging. What a fantastic windfall. The looks on their faces when I come back. Not to worry, we have a can opener. But seriously, what was a bike car doing all the way up in the mountains in the first place? A moment off after that, doubt flashes through my mind. I abruptly realize, oh, this is a dream. Anyway, I'll just take these back to camp now. Let's all gorge ourselves until we can't eat another bite. I tried to focus on that thought, but once the first realization hit, I could never manage to fall back into the illusion. Mostly I would wake up with a start at this point. The instant my eyes opened, my stomach began gurgling violently, and the retching physical pain of it twisted my face into a miserable grimace. Even if it was a dream, I'd wish I'd at least taken a bite when I wrapped up the story at this point. Everyone would always laugh, "You're such an idiot, Amane." I'd hide half the food. I'd give everybody one can, then hide the rest. I'd hide the whole stash and eat it in secret. The majority openly admitted something along these lines, and then added with clear amusement that I was probably the only one stupid enough to come skipping right back without a second thought. It was now the 12th day. The 12 days we'd spent living worse than stray dogs. Even among those who had been comparatively healthy, unmistakable symptoms of weakening were beginning to appear. The soft footsteps of death creeping steadily up behind us were growing impossible to ignore. Our nerves were rubbed raw from tension, our spirits timid and fearful. The first to be caught by our shadowy pursuer was Komori-san's pet, Akun, the Shih Tzu Allion. It wasn't a durable breed by nature, and what food we had simply wasn't suitable for a dog with a weak stomach. And so, having fallen into a high fever during the days of relentless rain, Allion simply never opened his eyes again. He died quietly early this morning. Kneeling in front of the lifeless body, flat on its side with limbs stiffly extended, Komori-san removed the collar from Allion's neck and wrapped it around her thin wrist. That dog had been like a brother to Komori, but she didn't break into loud wails over its corpse. Her strangled sobs forced their way out from behind clenched teeth, seeming all the more piteous for it. Nobody could find anything to say to her. After a time, somebody mumbled about at least giving the animal a proper burial. Kazuki immediately raised an objection.
あら、食べないの?
We'd all been vaguely thinking it, but deeply ingrained social norms had kept us from admitting that even to ourselves, and yet Kazuki had blurted it out almost casually.
食べるって、犬を? そう、この子に助けてもらうのよ。
At Kazuki's typically cold words, every one of us sharply drew breath. Eat. Yes, there was nothing in the world we wanted to do more at this moment. The dog in front of us was nothing but a corpse. Now that it was dead, it was no longer a dog, it was meat. would it be okay to eat a dog that died from sickness? It was Kazuki's suggestion, so presumably it was safe, but surely we couldn't start talking about this right in front of the grieving Komori-san, and this whole idea just felt so wrong. We all hesitated. The silence grew. To be honest, we wanted to eat it, but something inside us was still offering considerable resistance to the idea. Nobody could make up their own mind. All eyes settled on our last remaining formal authority figure, Captain Sakashita.
そうね。彼女の意見が正しいわ。食べましょう。
Honestly, as desperate as the situation is, I wouldn't hesitate to eat the dog. From the expression on the captain's face, those undeniably callous words must have tasted bitter in her mouth. Komori-san jerked her head up as if stung, then slowly turned from side to side, looking into our faces one by one. Everyone averted their eyes from Komori's tearful gaze, everyone except Kazuki, who met it firmly and gave her a small nod. Staring steadily down into those plaintive eyes, Kazuki murmured, "This is Alion's final duty." I'm probably mispronouncing that poor dog's name, and I apologize. Komori-san's face crumpled as she slowly croaked out an answer. Inhuman. The word was written clearly on Komori-san's face for any who cared to look. Even so, most of us let out small involuntary sighs of relief at her surrender.
だったら虫が湧く前に肉にした方がいいわね。
But that relief was short-lived. Kazuki's words once again left us all frozen like stones. Right, if we're gonna eat that corpse, we'd have to butcher it first. There was no choice. We had to pluck the hair from the dog's body and carve it up using a knife. But of course, no one wanted that job. Again, we looked to the captain. Biting her lower lip, the captain looked and turned to Kazuki. And finally, Kazuki closed her right eye and tilted her head lightly to the left.
皆さん、じゃんけんってご存知?
As the result of an impartial game of chance, the duty of processing the corpse fell on Koide-senpai. She tried briefly to resist, protesting, "I've never butchered a dog before," but of course none of us had made a habit of carving up puppies either, so the argument didn't really hold together. As the kitchen knife trembled dangerously in Koide's hand, the captain tried offering her some rough encouragement along the lines of, "You're a doctor's daughter, aren't you?" To be honest, though, it was a little hard to grasp what that had to do with anything. Visibly bracing herself, Koide gripped the knife firmly in both hands and took a step forward. But in that moment, her eyes met those of the dead dog below her, and she immediately burst into terrified tears. Naturally, the gallant hero Kazuki stepped in to save the day. Taking in her good hand the punishment rod she normally used to strike that hand for our morning wake-up call, she swung it down with all her might on the dog's head. Everyone gasped in shock at the gruesome act, mainly barely stifling screams. If I start shrieking pointlessly, maybe I'm next. That irrational fear seized us all, and silence fell over the valley.
これでもうどこが目なのかわからないでしょ? 頑張りなさい.
Meeting eyes with the dog is scary, is it? Well, just crush its eyes beyond recognition. That was about as elegant a solution as blowing off your jaw with a shotgun to cure a toothache.
"私がやってもいいけど、あなた、私がいなかったらどうするの? もし生き残ったのがあなた一人だったら、誰も助けてはくれないのよ."
As she spoke, Kazuki tossed her wooden sword aside, then took the kitchen knife from Koide's hands with a disdainful little snort. Everyone's got their hands full with their own problems right now. No one's going to protect you. If you're weak, you're simply going to die first. Kazuki might not have said that at point blank, but her meaning was all too clear. We studied the ground at our feet in silence. The strong eat the weak. Men and beasts, insects and plants all live and die by that rule. Many hissed about Kazuki's cruelty in low voices, but her powerful words and unhesitating actions left no room for open objection. Kazuki possessed not only the decisive personality of a leader, but also the ability to inspire fear, characteristic of a ruler. Everyone could only hang their heads and obey.
あなた、ずいぶんと素敵な人ね。
でしょ？あなたの彼氏にもベッドで同じことを言われたわ。
Oh, sharp wit there.
お肉の用意ができたら真っ先にお声をかけますから、今は引っ込んでいていただけます？
Captain Takashita turned abruptly on her heel and stalked away without another word.
強引だな。部長泣いてたよ。
I think even Kazuki's starting to kind of get fed up with the group.
あのまま喧嘩になるよりはマシでしょ。うるさい女を黙らせるにはああいうしかなかったのよ。部長の彼氏って誰なの？さあ、でも何の反論もしてこないところを見ると、心当たりのある存在がいるのか、もしくは彼氏がいないことをバカにされたと思って二の句を告げなくなったか、そのどちらかね。もし部長が切れて飛びかかってきたらどうするつもりだったの？
Well, Kazuki
あ
has
な
a
たな
knife.
ら平気で犬の頭を潰すような女に襲いかかる？つまりはそういうことよ。全部計算していたのね。それは買いかぶりすぎよ。部長に襲いかかられる確率もゼロではなかったわ。まあその時は無様に殴られてみんなの同情を集めようと思っていたけれど、生き残るために犬の頭を潰す女と個人的な感情を暴走させて怪我人を殴る女、みんなはどっちの味方になるかしら。あなたどう思う？怖い人だね、和樹。そうね、自覚はあるわ。私みたいな女は男の子にはモテないでしょうね。
I badly wanted to scream, "If you're well aware, how about doing something about it?" But I could anticipate her answer. No doubt delivered in her best nails on a chalkboard girly voice. "I'm sorry, I just can't. It's too hard for widow old me," or some such. Felt as though I had maggots crawling down my spine at the mere thought. In any case, if there was a single man in the world who'd want to go out with this woman, I'd really like to meet him, so I can get him the help he needs. And so, Kazuki cleaned the gut of the dog, reducing it to meat. We soaked it in barbecue sauce from the communal stockpile and cooked its little body golden brown. The powerful aroma of grease and spicy sauce wafted through the air. We swallowed mouthfuls of warm drool again and again. Just a few days ago, that hunk of meat had been an energetic, adorable little dog, frolicking around Komori's feet. There was definitely a widespread feeling of guilt, but the sound of sizzling meat and the smell of dripping grease were irresistibly alluring. Even those who had whispered heatedly about Kazuki's inhuman cruelty couldn't overcome their own stomachs. When the meat was finally grilled and ready to be divided, they all swarmed up with plates in their outstretched hands. I was the one who carved the meat for distribution. The rear legs looked to be the choicest and most nourishing part of the body. Lopping off one with a kitchen knife, I placed it on Captain Sakashita's plate. The second went to Kazuki. After that, I divided the meat as evenly as I could between the rest of us. We had even carefully washed the internal organs and cooked them as well. After distributing it all, there was nothing left to do but greedily devour my share. I didn't know you could eat organs. I felt like such a very long time since I'd tasted meat. The first bite was so delicious that I went quite literally dizzy with bliss. My protein-starved tongue tingled as the animal fat slowly spread out inside my mouth. My stomach squeezed tightly in on itself as though consciously trying to wring every particle of sustenance from the food. Of course, it was an ornamental lapdog, a toy breed when distributed among the entire group. Its body provided us with a mere mouthful of meat each. Even so, we all wept with the joy at the nourishment, and as soon as the meat was gone, everyone had been crunching away at the bones. We had assumed Komori would firmly resist the idea of consuming her pet's flesh, but in the end, she bit into her share of meat like all the rest, sniffling miserably the whole time. Tears blending with the mucus running from her nose, she ate. That one mouthful of meat kept us alive for today. I don't think we'll ever forget that taste for the rest of our lives, even if we want to. 13th day. It happened far too suddenly. Komori-san, who'd seemingly perfectly fine just a moment before, crumpled limply to the ground. For a moment, everyone who turned their head at the sound was simply dumbfounded. Komori-senpai called out to her, Kanade-senpai called out to her partner, but Komori gave no response. Her body had begun to twitch convulsively on the ground. Komori hadn't fainted from lightheadedness or anemia. She was thrashing her body spasmodically, as if she had been possessed by some malevolent spirit. It was at once bizarre and terrifying to watch. Kaneda, suspecting an epileptic seizure, forcibly pinned down her partner's body from above in an attempt to keep her from hurting herself. Koide-senpai and I jumped up to answer Kaneda's call as the others looked on in shocked silence. We managed to move Komori-san onto a blanket, but the seizure continued. At Koide's anxious command, I ran off to find my own partner.
どう？原因は何なの？倒れた時の様子はどうだったの？
わかんないよ。気がついたら地面に倒れてて、魚みたいにピクンピクンって暴れ出して。
転換の発作にしては長すぎるわね。
Komori's breathing was rapid. Her teeth chattered in her mouth and her unfocused eyes swung randomly from left to right. Her hands and feet trembled strongly in a regular rhythm as if matching the beating of her heart.
犬を食べたからトキソプラズマに感染したんじゃ。
トキソプラズマは猫よ。でもありえないわけじゃないわね。
Toxoplasma is a common parasite protozoan that spreads easily, so if you eat meat that's not properly cooked, there is a risk of infection. Normally, that's hardly the cause for concern, but for those with badly weakened immune systems, it can cause serious illness and even death.
まともな免疫抗体があればこうはならないわよ。日和見感染症ね。
どうするの？このまま見ているしかないの？
検査のしようもないし、病名が分かったところで手の打ちようもないわ。せいぜい原因を特定して同じ過ちを犯さないように喚起するぐらいね。
原因は犬じゃないの？
犬はよく焼いてから食べたでしょ。考えにくいわね。小森さん、何か他に変わったものを食べたりしてなかった？
After a moment of thought, Kaneda's mouth fell open with a little ah.
そういえば、なんか花の芽を食べてた。
花？何の花？
名前はわからないけど、綺麗なピンク色の初めて見る花だった。これ食べられますかねって言って、その場で何個かつまんで食べてた。
なんだろう。ジギタリス？
日本に生えてるかしら。自生が確認されたのは一度きりでしょ。
Kazuki laid a hand on Komori's trembling forehead.
熱があるわ。体内に侵入した病原菌を熱処理しようとしている証拠ね。水分をたっぷりと取らせて体を温かくしていっぱい汗をかかせるしかないわね。
それで治るの？
We can only hope.
悪いけど他には何もできないのよ。何にせよこれに懲りたらよくわからないものをつまみ食いするのはやめなさい。
Under these starvation conditions, it was inevitable that our immune systems would grow weak. Recently, drinking water raw has become common practice, as no one wanted to waste time boiling it when they could be searching for food. And when foraging in the forest, many would pop even totally unfamiliar plants into their mouth if they looked vaguely edible. By now, disease is so mild that a normal person probably wouldn't even notice them were potentially life-threatening to us. That was how weak we'd grown. As we slowly carried Komori's quivering body into her tent, we could only grind our teeth at our powerlessness.
風見、ちょっといいかな。
We just left Komori to rest when Sakura-senpai called out to us.
なん
Sorry,
か
Sakuma.
伊吹の様子がおかしいんだよ。
I had a bad feeling about this. The moment we followed Sakuma into her tent, that presentiment was realized.
ねえ、今日は何日？私たちがここに来てから。
Wrapped up in her sleeping bag, Ibuki stared intently at a point in the tent's canopy, smiling slightly at nothing in particular as she spoke.
今日は何日？
今日は26日。 ここに来て13日目よ。
そう。早く帰りたいな。
Even as she answered, Ibuki's eyes never turned toward us. Her tone of her voice was vague, unfocused, almost like a sleepwalker conversing with her dream.
ちょっと出ようか。
As directed, we moved to leave the tent, but Ibuki immediately piped up.
ねえ、どこ行くの？私も行く。
すぐ戻ってくるよ。おとなしく寝てな。
今日は何日
？26日だよ。
そう。早く帰りたいな。
参ったよ。今朝からずっとあの調子なんだ。いつもならすぐに元に戻るのに、今日はもうずっとあんな感じだ。
どうすることもできません。ここには薬もなければ自己回復力を上げるだけの需要もないんです。
このまま腐るに任せるしかないのか。
申し訳ありません。
君が悪いんじゃないさ。無理を言っているのは私だ。すまなかったね。
いえ。
Tsukumi-senpai powerless attempts at a smile conveyed only resignation and defeat, made all the more pitiful by her swollen face. It wasn't the flesh swelling of a fever. Her face was drained of all color, her ghastly pale cheeks visibly rough and dry. She was blinking constantly throughout our conversation. It may have been difficult merely to keep her eyes open behind those bloated cheeks.
佐久間さんも栄養失調が顔に出ています。気をつけてください。
そうだね。気をつけるよ。
Exactly how was she supposed to be careful about starving when there was no damn food? Tsukuma seemed mature and refrained from yelling the obvious retort in Kazuki's face, but quite possibly she simply no longer had the energy. Just how long would this situation last?